Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 109. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Doing great, John. Here in Fort Worth, it's not going to be above freezing for 5 to 7 days.
Yikes.
Pretty crazy. But alas, we are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
All right. That's great, Nick. Sorry to hear about the weather there. That's
It's all right. It feels like winter.
Yeah, I guess I didn't know that it snows in Dallas, Fort Worth. Like, that's just kind of shocking to me.
It does. And today it snowed a lot. So pretty cool.
Huh? Wow. Okay. Well, let's talk about our episode today. We have our first returning guest, Mike Burkhart. I'm pretty excited about that. It's a different type of interview this week. We are talking to Mike because he experienced a pretty significant personal loss, and it ended up affecting his professional life as well. And we wanted to hear about that effect, but we also wanted to hear about that process of dealing with grief, dealing with loss on a personal basis, not just, the professional effects.
Right. And if it's, there are parts that are going to be somber and pretty emotional. So hang in there, folks. I want to say that you need to pay close attention to what happened when Mike tried to go back to work after experiencing this loss and trying to process it for a while. And as I was reflecting back on this episode, it made me think about the Cody DeArkland episodes, episode 85 and 86, and about how he encouraged us to listen to hear and not to respond, but this idea of letting someone talk. Mike makes a great point when someone experiences a loss and they say, I lost so-and-so who was close to me. There's nothing wrong with saying, tell me about that person, as a way to give them the chance to talk about it.
Yeah. It's really
Other than that, I'm not spoiling it.
Yeah. Let's get directly into it. Despite the somber topic, I really enjoyed talking to Mike again. So here it is, episode 109, part 1, of course, because this is the Nerd Journey. We can't do anything in just one part. Part 1 with Mike Burkhart. Mike Burkhart, welcome back to the Nerd Journey. First repeat guest.
Oh man, so nice you had to have me twice. I really
That's
appreciate
right.
you guys having me back. This is awesome.
So fun fact, for those playing along at home, we mentioned in our episode 100 that both previous episodes with Mike Burkhart reached the Nerd Journey top 10 most downloaded at our 100 episode point. So really, Mike, this is about marketing. It's not about you. It's about us getting the message out. So hope that's cool.
See, I was going to actually talk to you guys about that because it is absolutely about me, because I was the only one who downloaded that from multiple thousands of devices. I just really liked that episode so much that it was all me. I literally was the only person listening to it.
Oh, Mike, you don't need to make excuses to talk to us. We'll just hop on a call. Like, you don't need to go, I'll boost my numbers with John and Nick, and then they'll have me back on.
I really muse about the idea that is possible in the first place. Like, there's somebody out there that was like, oh, I gotta get my podcast numbers up. Sweet. Download it from my laptop and my desktop at work.
You laugh about that, but I remember coming across like a feature at my current employer where they test applications for mobile devices. So like, like they'll do Android and iOS tests like at scale, and like podcaster syndrome. The immediate first thing I thought of was like, oh, I wonder if you could like test like deploying like a new operating system with a podcast app and then download specific podcast episodes and boost your numbers that way. And then I luckily did not vocalize that to anybody.
So if you wonder why Nerd Journey just became in the top 500 podcasts worldwide on every platform, it's not because of that idea. That never happened. It's quality content, people. Amazing guests, not Mike Burkhart. But anyone...
Yeah, number 1, Joe Rogan. Number 2, Nerd Journey. Never heard of those guys, but curiously, they've shot to the top of the charts in the last week.
These guys are like the dark horse of podcasts.
They put me on Reddit. It was podcast bets, and it just went straight through the roof.
But yeah, seriously though, one of the reasons we wanted to follow up with Mike was we actually have a totally different topic track to talk to him about today. So we think you'll enjoy it. It's something that we have not talked to anyone about before or done an episode on. So here we go.
Yeah. So Mike, one of the things that kicked off this conversation was we saw that, the last time we had you on, you were working at Nutanix, and we talked through kind of the transition through going to Nutanix as an employer. And then we recently saw that you left. So, we wanted to ask you about that transition, like, if you were comfortable about talking, the background about that and what happened, and then what you're doing now, what lessons you might have learned.
Of course. And so I thank you guys for having me on for this, and it's really convenient to have the timeline that we do, even though we all feel like we're in an alternate timeline because of 2020/21 COVID. So, but that all plays into kind of my journey and story here. Went to Nutanix, solution architect in the education space, building content, helping kind of, get to 2.0, 3.0 of what their lab delivery structure looks like for students. Really trying to ramp up and vamp some of those courses, and they spit out a whole bunch of other certifications that we were chasing down for educational purposes. So it was a really exciting time, and a lot of work to be done, a lot of really good people. The team there is awesome. I love and miss my people that I worked with. So just to jump into it, June of last year, my wife and I lost a child in childbirth, and everything it was a normal pregnancy, normal birth, and my son unfortunately was born dead, and that was a huge it took a huge toll. It was a huge hit on both of us, and it's confusing, right? Most of us have experienced loss of elder family members and elder friends. Maybe even you've experienced friends our age and peers, depending on what generation you are. But losing a child is a really confusing experience because it's loss of potential, loss of possibility. In certain senses, loss of naivety. Of the, I didn't expect kids could die. That's weird. And when you go through the process of having a child and the pregnancy, you don't factor that in. It's not a risk that you consider, right? Here's the thing, like, it's really, really strange to know the policy of paternity leave, but then have to go back to your boss and ask for bereavement leave, right? Paternity leave, in my case, I was going to get a month. My bereavement leave per company policy was 3 days. Which again, it's normally like the cultural standard of this is how long it takes you to get from, you're notified of death, and then a couple of days go by, you have a funeral, and you inter the departed and say your goodbyes. And Again, since this is about grief, I don't think that any amount of time is going to give you the appropriate amount of span to grieve. Right, your grief is yours, your process is yours, and it takes whatever time it takes. So for me, my boss at Nutanix, Ken Thacker, shout out, he's amazing, and known him from the VMware days. He gave me a month off, and just immediately, like as soon as I informed him, he was like, "Whatever I can do. Oh my gosh, this is crazy," So super supportive, absolutely like everything I could have asked for, but you can't, right? I kid you not. I mean, when I say I literally cried all the time, I do not want to be mistaken. I cried from the moment I woke up. I cried while I was eating. I would cry watching my son. I would cry while taking my dog out. It was, and I wasn't self-destructive. I was just distraught. I was beside myself. And to know that depth of grief and of loss is, eye-opening. It's impactful. I thought to myself, a couple of weeks in, I was like, oh my gosh, like if I can feel like this, anybody can feel like this at any given time. This is just a, like to feel so completely helpless and, there are a lot of, my wife was very angry. And that's a part of grief as well. For me, I've had problems with anger in my past, right? Not uncommon for a guy who hasn't been taught to deal with their emotions healthily. So, I worked with those, but at the same time, it was like, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to feel that. So I felt sorrow and sadness and just, desperate. And all along, like, the people at Nutanix, like everybody in my team and everybody around me was, they were sending, name it, like emails and texts, and I would get phone calls. They would text me and ask if they could call, and whatever you need, and just every last thing. It was beautiful, in light of the moment, but just again, it rocks your world. And anyone out there, it doesn't matter who you are, what kind of grief you're going through. If you are, reach out, right? We've all seen how 2020 has affected, the health and livelihood, mentally, physically, and otherwise of everyone that we know and care about, and those in our community. So if you are grieving, if you are experiencing a loss, I don't care what it is. I mean, make sure that you reach out to others. Make sure you get the help that you need and so desperately deserve in that time. And that's, ultimately, I spent that month, grieving, crying. I very much kept to myself. I'm an extrovert. I'm a talker. Anyone that knows me knows I don't shut up. So, if it takes that, that meteorite to hit, to hit me on the head to shut me up, you can understand the severity of the moment. But I wasn't seeking help at the time. I didn't know how. And that's for those of you that have friends that experience grief. Here's a pro tip. How can I help is a very powerful phrase, and it doesn't involve anything on your part other than, I'm so sorry, I'm here for you, how can I help? If you can do that for those who suffer, it's because in my experience, I didn't know. I had no idea. All I knew was that life sucked so bad. Life was the worst. And luckily, I did not consider suicide. I was not self-harming. And again, those are things that can come up for people, and that's something you should be aware of too. Like, grief is huge, and it is to be respected and and worked through and unpacked. So anywho, so this whole period of time, like I said, I was given this gift of time off work, and at the end of it, I talked to my boss, and he's like, well, if you want more time, we can give it to you. It'll just be FMLA and it'll be unpaid. Um, but that's totally fine. Whatever you need. FMLA, by the way, is I believe 12 weeks. So, for those of you that need that, take it if you can afford to. If you can take that time. And that's the other thing. Like, grief is terribly complicated because your life doesn't stop. You still need to feed yourself. You still need to go to sleep. You still need to take your dog out. You still need to, I have a 4-year-old that was, he was sad the first week, and then the second week he was wondering where the baby was. And, to face that and to say, like, and to retell that story was just, traumatic, but he's a blessing in and of himself. His joy, his ability to cope with things, and to move with us, and and even asking, like, Dad, why are you so sad? And I was like, well, like, who is this tiny little Buddha who's is just like trying to help me articulate my pain, and trying to help me verbalize, and that's moving through that. So it's really beautiful, and it really was helpful. But I think, there's a point at which you need to start seeking therapy as well, whenever that is. And I had not yet. After that month was done, it was all I could do to keep getting out of bed, to keep upright. But I wasn't functional at the time. I really wasn't, productive by any means. But, part of our, part of the male identity is, the provider, at least how I've been taught, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever. So that was definitely a, hey, like, you got to go, and you got to wake up, and you got to make some money, and you got to put food on the table. I was like, okay. So I went back to work, but like I said, not productive, not, and there were just days and days and days. I'd be crying. I would, 9 to 5 wasn't a thing. It wasn't possible. So, I would go into, go to work at 7. I would come back up at 5, have dinner with my family, and then continue working late into the night. And, I don't even know how much work I got done. I have no idea the quantity or quality of my production, which is also something that as a worker, you're like, well, I want to do good work. I want to, I want to do things that I want to put my name on, and I want people to be able to recognize, like, oh, that guy's a good worker, No idea. So at the end of it, I was working 16-hour days trying to just make ends meet and get things done. So finally one night, we had transitioned my 4-year-old to his own bedroom. For those of you that co-sleep with your kids, I feel your pain. This is about grief. That's
a different podcast.
A different podcast entirely, is sleeping with your kids in your bed. So we'd moved him to his own bed, and it was my night, And as a parent, like, parenthood doesn't stop either. So it's my night to put him to bed and make sure everything's cool, and had to work. I hadn't gotten my stuff done for a deadline on Wednesday. It was Wednesday morning, stuff was due, and it was Tuesday night at 1 a.m. And my wife comes downstairs, and it was after like the 4th time my son had woken up because, he's sleeping alone and he hates it. So don't co-sleep. But, so she comes downstairs and she's like, look, like, I'm not trying to get on your case or anything, but it's 1 a.m. Like, I did this over the weekend, and it was supposed to be my night last night, and then it's this and da-da-da. And I was like, you're right. Like, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. And I'm killing myself trying to get things done. And I'm not being effective. I'm not, so I turned in my resignation that night. And it was a very irresponsible move. I will say that. It was not well thought out. It was not. Now, what I had made sure of is that, had a financial planner who's a friend of the family, and they had ensured that we had money saved up, right? So they were like, look, just in case of emergencies. And I was like, okay, this is the emergency. This is an emergency. It really is. And it is. Like you are going through the hardest time in your life. If you have a hard time eating, you have a hard time sleeping, you can't feel well, even talking to family is hard. That is an emergency, right? So another reason I talked about FMLA, like that's an emergency. Take the time, right? Ensure that you're protected during the periods that you struggle most. So I was very, very lucky to be in that position. And there are people that aren't, so we need to be cognizant of that too. It's tough, but do what you can to get by. That period of time is, those formative weeks and months are just crucial. So anywho, so it was nothing to do with the company. It was nothing to do even with the work. I feel like I worked that job for almost a year at that point, and every job's got its ups and downs, but I was completely ineffective, and I was unhappy with my own outcomes, and their work doesn't stop, and project deadlines have to happen. And it's not like I would get fired. It's not like I wouldn't have gotten fired. It's just, I couldn't take the stress of it. So I imploded. So that happened.
I think the thing about emergencies is that you can't, foresee them, right? You don't know what it is that's going to hit you that you're going to have that reaction from.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a very interesting kind of slow build for me. I know some people have immediate reactions to stuff. Some people, everybody has their own way of feeling, thinking, doing, acting, And for me, it was, I'm trying to get over it. I'm trying to get past it. And there's no getting over grief. There's working through it. There's accepting it and integrating into your person, right? So it's another thing I want to emphasize too, is if you are a grieving person, or if you know someone that's grieving, don't hope that you get over it. There's no unlosing something, there's no undying a person. So, take that to heart and really focus on the healing, focus on the integrating. So yeah, and like you said, an emergency, you do what you do to survive. It's an emergency situation. And if I could tell myself what I know now, I would say reach out to your anchors. And by that I mean, reach out to the people or places or activities that root you in your humanity. They don't have to make you feel good. If they do, even better. But they have to ground you and balance you, right? Because you're a spinning top that's wobbling like crazy, and you want to keep spinning, but you have this huge weight on one side that's completely trying to topple you over every day. And your first thought is, I want to throw this weight off. I just want to get rid of it. Just forget about it. It's fine. You can't. That weight and what you have to do as a spinning top is you slow down, you adjust the weight, you eventually learn that it's not a weight at all. It's a part of you. And that's not a bad thing. It is growth. It is life. So, but you, in the moment, I can't, and it's ground zero, right? And you're in emergency mode. So the reactivity, and gosh, as IT people, don't we talk about reactive versus proactive all the time? Oh, you really want to get on the front foot. You really want to start doing some things that are business revenue generating and make IT more of a business partner or a business value center for the, and in my own life, I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to sit here and watch everything burn. I can't be proactive about any of that. I don't know.
I'm getting all these alerts. What do I do?
Right? Just watch your inbox fill up is what you do.
Well, I think, it's so, obviously, I think Nick and I both are really sorry to hear that you went through this loss, and especially, the grief afterwards, like, I think is something that, all of us, like you said, have probably gone through, like loss is just, loss of a child is like this, specific thing that is, horrific. And, I think the thing that you called out specifically is the loss of potential, right? Like the dreams and hopes and having those things just kind of suddenly cut out from underneath you. And, you know, I don't think that I had any idea that you were going through this, but, I do think that, um, that emotional reaction is just something that like you can't judge yourself for. You know what I mean? It's your emotion reaction is what it is. And we all hope that we're like, putting like emotional funds in the bank so that we have like that strength, later on to, to make withdrawals, right? And to get through hard times. But it also just doesn't work like that, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. I'm gonna pay it forward. I feel great today, and I'm gonna just put this in my emotional bank. And
Right.
Yeah.
and and really, what you are is a child who skinned their knee for the first time. The first time you experience anything, it's oh my god, oh, the world's ending, and somebody has to come along and help you out and say like, yeah, I'm sorry that this is happening to you, and what can we do? And I don't know. I just want to sit here and cry. Well, do that, okay? But yeah, I mean, it cracks me up thinking about that because it really was like there was a part of my ego that was like, well, I'm built of stern stuff, so I can get through this, and then that part of me was like, but I'm also gonna cry every day because I'm totally terrified. So
Well, yeah, I think you're also touching on that, like toxic masculinity. I think that we've talked about, before,
mhm.
in our conversations, where it's like we have this model in our mind for like how we're supposed to handle things, um, especially as men, and it's like if your reaction doesn't match that, then somehow you're a failure. And I mean, I just culturally, like we need to bring people up differently in order to avoid that. And if you have been brought up that way, it's just an instinctual reaction. It's just kind of baked into like how you react to things. And I don't know how you can get away from that. And especially with such a trauma, it's tough to take a step aside, to step aside from your own feelings and like do some self-analysis and say, oh, well, probably, this is what's going on. And, if you were able to do that, then you wouldn't be having the problem in the first place, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunate irony.
Well, it's interesting because, Mike, you had to process your grief, your wife had to process, and also your 4-year-old had to process. And
Hmm.
he's not developed emotionally and all those things. So you got to help him while you're going through it too. And while it is not the same, disclaimer,
Hmm.
I do remember when my stepmother-in-law had a stroke on New Year's Day in 2016 and eventually passed away. And my daughter, wasn't that old at the time, like 7, right? And so she's still learning about what death is, and like she had nightmares for
Hmm.
the longest time and thought that if someone goes to the hospital, they're probably going to die. And so, it was one of those things. As a male, you're like protector of the family too, right? And I can't fix this problem for her. The best way to fix it for her is to not shield her from all the funeral stuff, but to allow her to experience it so that when something like this happens again, she'll be able to process it.
Hmm.
But yeah, unfortunately, because something will happen again, we're gonna lose someone. I hate saying it, but
Yeah,
it's inevitable.
that's and I want to take a minute to say I am sorry for your loss. I mean, that's a loss of parents, loss of children. Grief is, it's the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So is grief. It's different for everyone, and our processes are all different, but um, they leave an impact. And you're right, it is part of the cycle of life. It is absolutely. I wish I would have, taken this to heart personally. Like I like to tell my son, everyone who's alive has been born and they will die, and that's just normal. And death is a part of life, and we can't ignore that. And but you're absolutely right. The integration for the child is very tricky. And watching them play things out. And not to be too like weird or anything, and I guess this gets edited out later if it's inappropriate, but uh, my son, we would take him to the playground, and yes, we went to playground. It was before the lockdown stuff, and don't give me COVID crap, you crazy people. I wear a mask. Shut up. So that's all I'm going to hear after this podcast goes live. It's going to be like Burkhart took his kid to a playground during COVID. Yes, we were
Can't
wearing
believe
masks.
that guy.
I know, the jerk. But we were all wearing masks and everything was fine, and the playgrounds were still open at the time. So have at it. But my son, it's like so dark. My son was playing with some other kids he didn't know, and they were all talking about like, their friends and stuff, and like, hey, why don't we play house? And my son said, great, let's play house, and we could pretend like the baby died. And I just looked over, I was like wide eyed. Yeah, right? John's giving me this look like his like, oh gosh. And that was my response. I was just like, and I let it play out, right? Because this is part of how children process. Right? They process through play. They process through the living aspect of it. It's not until you're an adult that you get all crazy into your head and pent up, and you have all sorts of weird rationale of why you're not going to fix yourself. Because otherwise, you'd probably try to play it out too. So he was really going through his own process.
Mike, I don't want to break in here too much, but don't worry. Like, you can just, over time, I think you can teach him to like just really stuff those feelings down. And not say those things out loud, and not deal with his emotions and pain, and then eventually he can be on a podcast about dealing with his yeah.
I really feel, I came from an Italian and German family, so it was finish your plate and always have seconds, and on top of which it was eat your feelings. So I can definitely it's like, why don't you just have a cheeseburger instead? It's fine. I feel better after you eat. Man.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So
No, you're fine.
no, I totally understand though. It's like sometimes you see like the truth, through your kids and kids in general about like, oh, this, the way that we do things is cultural adaptation. It's not like the natural state, right? The natural state, before we learn all these like cultural norms, is to talk about things, is to play about those things, and kind of work through our feelings that way. And later on we learn, oh, I could just distract myself by doing something else and ignoring the problem.
I cycled a couple times through that, which was weird. I tell you what, like stages of grief were very strange for me. And there's no anybody that tells you there are only like 5 stages of grief and they go in this progression, that's not a thing, right? Like grief is grief. If you go through those 5 processes and serial, great. That textbook, good job. I don't know, like it wasn't like that for me, right? Grief comes in many different forms, and it cycles and it ebbs and flows, and it doesn't get easier. This is something my grief counselor. I started seeing a grief counselor last August, I want to say. It was right after I quit my job, and she loves to say, life does not get, it doesn't get easier, it gets less hard. And kind of like the whole idea I said before about the spinning top integrating the weight. It's just like that. It's literally, grief does not get easier to bear, but it's not harder over time. But it does come in cycles. There were days where like I said, there were days where I wouldn't get out of bed, literally. And there are days where when I didn't cry, I felt guilty. I felt real bad about not feeling bad, which is weird. Like, what? Like, I'm having a neutral day, and I'm not like completely debilitated by my loss, and all of a sudden I'm feeling bad about like, what? But
Yeah, it's like survivor's guilt for like grieving. Like it's like,
mm-hmm.
oh, I'm not feeling as bad and I should be. So what's wrong with me? So then you start feeling bad about that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you get on your own case about feeling bad about stuff, and that's just a beautiful cycle. I shouldn't be feeling bad. I shouldn't be telling myself stuff. You're talking to yourself. You're crazy. But no, so it's, that's I'll tell you one unique thing that I learned through this process. So having a stillborn child is, even saying that, it feels like a pariah. It feels like this very taboo subject, and it's not. It's been happening since the advent of mankind. Like, one in the United States, 1 out of 160 children die during childbirth. That means that there are about any given year there are 25 to 40,000 parents who are grieving the loss of their children, right? And that sucks. That's a really big number. But if you look at other developed countries, like I think in the UK, I think it's like 1 out of 200, maybe. Maybe they have a little bit better luck for some reason, but
They have national health care.
I mean, I wasn't gonna say it, but since we're on the topic, like, yeah. And their home births are legal, and women have autonomy over their bodies. No big deal. It's fine.
Hashtag politics.
Right. We're not here to talk about politics. We're talking about grief. So got to rein myself in. But no, so child death, right? During childbirth, stillborn children happen, and they're a very natural part of the birth process that, again, like I said before, it's not a risk we want to consider when having a child. It's not something you focus on. It's not even on the horizon. You're just like, everything's going to go fine. I'm going to have a kid, and hopefully they got 10 fingers and 10 toes and blah, blah, blah. But when it happened, I was faced with a really unique situation of every time someone said, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm here for you. What do you need? I didn't care. It didn't land with me very well because I felt very strongly that they didn't know what I was going through, and they wouldn't. And why would you? That, and I don't know why that. And my wife felt the same. I've talked to other people who have lost children, and there's actually entire communities formed around this very same topic, because it's such a really strange loss, right? And grief, psychologically speaking, there's like over 200 forms of grief or something. They categorize by very different, loss of grief in the form of loss of trauma, of loss of innocence, loss of control, loss of identity or association. So there's tons and tons of different ways of experiencing grief, and this one in particular, not like anything else I've been through, and definitely needed a Sherpa. Like, my grief counselor is my favorite person, and I'm not just saying that because I'm going to make her listen to this podcast, but
It's part of your download number strategy,
right? she's going to be at least number 2 for this episode. But no, like it really is one of those things where, like, you're just like, oh my gosh, like I need to know that somebody feels or has felt this way before, and how do I get out of this? Because you feel like you're in molasses, right? Like, emotionally you have this like, oh, like I can't move, I can't, like, all of the things that I was preparing for. And birth is this very volcanic, bad analogy, moment that is just like, like build up, build up, build up, build up. Like, oh, we're pregnant. It's all happy. Okay, we're gonna have a baby. And then like 9 months later, it is the one day you're off to the races. Like it is a right, my water. Oh, we gotta go to this. Oh, we're going to the hospital. Pack a bag. Did I pack a bag? I don't know. Somebody take care of the dog. And it is super like nerve wracking, because it's unexpected. And then if you put death in there, it is the most like wicked, thrown for a loop kind of thing you will ever experience, because it's just like like toss out the idea of the record skipping in the party kind of thing, right? Like this is an absolute like someone unhitched the train and it ran into a mountain that didn't have a tunnel. Like it's insane. The experience is just unreal. And to have that kind of experience to me was just nuts. And so, and I just sunk into it, and it's just like, well, nobody knows what this feels like, and I don't know.
Well, I think that's like kind of a valid feeling, right? Because it's a huge number of people, but it's still a tiny population of people, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like it's naturally self-organizing, right? It's not like a natural, like publicized part of life, like people who are dealing with this. You don't just see like billboards around, right? So, I think it's very natural for you to like kind of tease out the idea that people might be feeling sympathy, right? This kind of like intellectualization of, I understand that you must be going through a lot, but not empathy. Like, I felt what you're feeling, and I know exactly what that pain is, and especially like you said, looking for a guide or a Sherpa to say, no, I've been on this trail before, and let me show you the way, and let me carry part of the load, right? Like that's exactly what we need in that situation, or in a lot of situations like this. And it's very difficult to ask for that, or even to know that it is something that you can ask for.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating to me to kind of go over it again. So, here's another kicker, and it's really interesting. Death is fairly taboo in Western society. We don't really enjoy talking about it. It's fairly distasteful for some reason. But if you talk about, Nick, you talked about your mother passing. If you talk about, oh, my grandfather died when I was 10, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry for your loss. We don't normally follow up those conversations with, tell me about him. Tell me about that person. How did they, how do you remember them? What impact did they make on your life? And that's really the conversation we should have about grief. If we have that moment with someone and they're vulnerable enough to share, then we should meet them in that vulnerability, right? In any certain way. Now, if somebody at the bus stop is just like, oh, my dad died, and you're like, I'm sorry for your loss, that's an appropriate response. You may not give that person a hug if you don't know them. Like, I get it.
Right.
Who's that guy? I don't know. Some bum. He lost his dad. It's weird. I just, was crying on my shoulder. Like, we may not do that. I get that. There's social contracts you have to uphold. But in that space, if someone is grieving, to reach out to them, to really give of yourself, if you can, right, is huge. And to boot, in that situation, if you're going to be honest, if you're going to be like, if you really want to be helpful, give that person what they need or what they ask, and not necessarily what you think they want, right? I encountered this a lot. It's really it's a sticky wicket. It is a very awkward conversation to have with people when they ask you what you need, and
please say lasagna. Please say lasagna.
Right? Like, come on. Like, let it be stromboli. My Italian grandmother used to make salsettis, and I found out many years later it's not called salsettis. It's called bruschetta. But other Italians have confirmed and denied this, depending on where in the boot they're from. So I'm still confused as to what that dish is. Anyway, so, uh, but yeah, I had this very interesting, and delicate dance to weave with like family and friends, especially very close family, because I didn't feel like being around anybody, and my parents constantly asked if they could come up and watch our son and take the dog out and be with us, and I was just like, I'm not letting anybody in the house right now, you know. And they, to be honest, they were very hurt by that, and I understand that, but at the same time, I'm like, those are your emotions and these are mine, and we need to have that separation right now because I lost a child. Like, I'm sorry that you want to come up here and help, and that sounds great in any other situation, but right now can't, So it's important to set boundaries. It's like absolutely cut a line, because if you give too much of yourself, or if you make choices that don't feel right for you, that can be even more traumatic than just saying no, right?
Well, I mean, there's always the potential of like all of a sudden now you're caring for other people's emotions as well as like dealing with the trauma of your own, right?
Mm-hmm. That's and yeah, to be honest, that's actually part of the reason why I felt really empowered on the whole. I want to talk to people who have lost children, right? Because there is that identity, there is that that understanding, and some of the stuff you shouldn't tell to people who are grieving. It's like if someone lost a child, you don't say, "Oh, you can always have another one." Like that was like, a couple
Oh my
times.
goodness!
I know, I know. Yes. What if I said like, "Oh, you can always have another grandpa"? Like, no, it's like,
Wow.
that person they're still gone. That still sucks. Like, you're still
It's like we're making the top 10 Late Show lists of things you shouldn't say.
Yeah. Yeah.
The message is your children are replaceable.
Yes. Oh yes, and they're all
That's
identical,
terrible.
by the way. They're the
Yeah.
same thing. They're just cogs. You just pop another one out. It's fine.
Yeah, not like each one had a unique eternal soul or anything like that.
No.
Or that I have any kind of trauma associated with this loss, like this specific event.
Yeah. Just have a different event with a different outcome. It's fine.
Right. And that will completely erase this.
Hey, Mike, I think John said something to this effect when we recorded our supporting colleagues of color episode, that when you're hurting in a way like you describe, when someone asks you what you need, it's like they give you homework.
True.
Did I capture that right, John?
Yeah, it can be like that, right? And different people have different experiences. But I think sometimes this is the tough thing about human beings, right? It's like, I need you to come up with a way for me to support you. Is like it's really an assignment and an obligation rather than an offer of support. Or it can be that way. And sometimes it's exactly what people need. It's rough. It's a rough situation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, the answer to that question could be, I need you to go away. Like, okay, and do that. Because if someone's saying that, that's their healthy boundary, and that's their like, I can't handle this right now, and this is unproductive. And for you to say, my gift to you is to have peace and calm, and to not have anxiety about this interaction, because I'm not trying to harm you. I'm trying to give you a gift, and if my gift is your solitude or your space, fantastic, and have it. And and that's the other thing. Like I didn't really know how to respond to that question either. If you think through, for those of you that do have friends or family that are grieving, if you think through what people need on a daily basis, right? We need food. We, of course, are going to need tissues. There are going to be a lot of wet eyes in the house. So probably the moisturized ones, not the grainy one ply. It's just,
Stop shopping at the dollar store, people.
This is all I'm saying. Crying out loud. It doesn't have to be like Cottonelle whatever lotion thing. Make sure it's not the smeary lotion either. The Cool Touch ones, I really liked those. Those were nice.
I feel a blog post coming on is like the appropriate Grief gear. Is that what I'm hearing?
I feel like this is going to be like eventually the Nerd Journey sponsored by Kleenex.
We'll have them in Audible, so we're getting there, John.
Oh, that's awesome. But yeah, I mean, I totally lost my train of thought on that. That's hilarious.
We're all about the derailment, man.
I know.
We bring you on to derail your trains of thought.
Hashtag squirrel chase.
No, you were talking about like, listening to what people actually need and maybe anticipating it. So sometimes
Yes.
offers of help can be like, tell me what it is that I can do for you. Like, for example, I could bring over dinner or lunch or go shopping for you or this or that. And sometimes that's what people need and sometimes not. Sometimes they just need, expressions or a hug, the way you said. A lot of times it's just dependent on that person and your relationship. It's so difficult, but life is risk, and you have to, if you really care about somebody and want to support them, then you got to take that risk and offer that support.
Mm-hmm. And apropos of that, that line of thinking. So interestingly enough, there's a book called The 5 Love Languages, normally handed out to married couples, and I don't think it's necessary for you to be married or even in a relationship. It's just a really revealing book about human nature, and it's about the 5 different ways that people receive love, and so it's good to point out that some people may receive gifts well and feel loved because of that. Some people may feel spending time is the way that they can interact and really feel fill their cup, and that's and we experience these multiple different ways. It's not just like 1 out of 5 is the way that I feel loved. It's varying degrees of gray shades. But during my worst time of grieving, it was really helpful for me that people would bring food, and made the comment before jokingly about eating my feelings, but you don't feel like eating sometimes, or maybe you feel like eating all the time. I'm a healthy eater, and I wasn't trying to starve myself, but I just did not eat well at all during that time and had plenty of food. Again, thank you, Ken Thacker and the people at Nutanix, and all of our friends surrounding us. But I just couldn't eat, couldn't bring myself to do it. We had actually a postpartum doula that we had already hired and paid for, which was very strange. She's still committed to working with us. So instead of her taking care of our child, she was doing laundry and cleaning house and helping us. Luckily enough, and I will say this, we got spoiled. Like hashtag earned it, I guess. She was a massage therapist, so she would give us massages. So I would say too, like, it's a really weird thing, but like that level of grief and stress, it absolutely takes its physical toll. I threw my back out. I kid you not. I spent 7 days in bed and got prescribed some painkillers, and the doctor was like, well, if it doesn't get better, we're looking at this physical therapy or something. And I'm like, why did my psoas muscle cramp up to the point of me not being able to walk? And he's like, you've been crying all the time. Every muscle in your body is tense. I was like, I just got a massage. He's like, that doesn't matter. And it's fascinating in retrospect, that level of impact, so food, buy people massages if that's okay for them. They may not want to be touched. That's also a thing. So, but
Well, that's a really good menu option. I hadn't even thought about that. Like some kind of like physical touch, like as a coping mechanism, like massage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of the 5 love languages, touch, right? That's actually my major one. It's really funny. My wife is like, so if I just like pat you on the shoulder, I was like, feels good, like it, like definitely would do again, It's like, oh, so holding hands is nice. Yeah, totally great. So, but again, it goes to that, right? Like how you want to help somebody. If you Google Maslow's hierarchy, if you don't know what it is, then that's a very easy one to take a shot at and say the basic level of Maslow's hierarchy is what you need to fulfill. This person who's grieving is not self-actualizing. That's the top of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid, where they like need food, water, shelter, that's where you want to aim, right? Because the bar is fairly low. Don't like overshoot it. Don't be like, I'm gonna get you a trip to Disneyland. That's not really the occasion. But look at the basics. You know, if they have pets, offer to take care of their pets or water their plants or whatever it is, right? And that's we had a lot of help, and I would have taken more if it was offered, right? I just every and anything. So, and it's hard to reach out because you're just, you're crying all the time. You're distraught. So,
And actually, people find it difficult to be around people who are in need and who are experiencing grief. So, like, part of the taboo against like death is also this taboo of like embarrassing people by being around them, like when they're grieving or something like that. It's some hazy like societal norm that it's difficult to put words on, or it's like, oh, I don't want to be around that, or somehow it's catching. That's like a weird attitude that sometimes we have, is like, oh, if I'm around sad people too much, maybe I'll be sad. And there's just a lot of weird stuff going around in our society that keeps us from helping and reaching out to people.
But you should be okay with being sad with someone else who's sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Jesus said, mourn with those who mourn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different models. You could use, Maslow. You could use, some kind of, religious grounding. You could use the 5 love languages. There's all these different models that you can use to offer help. And, the model that a lot of people use is avoidance. Like that's the worst option, right? Hope they're okay. Again, Nick, very intense topic, but I found it very valuable to listen to Mike's experience and the discussion. I especially liked, that thing that we were ending with there, which was Mike's thoughts on how to support somebody who's going through a tough time, personal loss. In his specific case, maybe giving them a menu of things that you could do for them, rather than, I think my thought at the time was like asking them to come up with ways for them to help you, like kind of like, here's a homework assignment, here's additional things that I need you to do on top of everything else. And his thoughts about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and kind of starting at the bottom of that pyramid and, food, shelter, those types of things. What can I do to help you, support you there? And only then, if those things are handled, moving up, the ladder or the pyramid.
Yeah, I really like that. And I was thinking about what Mike said in regard to it being challenging to accept people's condolences who he felt had not gone through the same thing or didn't understand what he had been through. It just kind of bounced off.
Right.
And he talked about how different people experience the grief in different ways. He was extremely sorrowful. His wife felt a bunch of anger, and his son, was still trying to process everything that happened. So different strokes for different folks, different ways to process. And I like the menu approach because it tries to cater to most of those, since you don't necessarily know just in an initial conversation how someone is dealing with it, if they'll even open up about it to you.
Absolutely. I really liked, that reference, that connection you made to maybe a specialized group for grief around that specific thing, like, death of a child, because maybe there's only insights that people with that experience can offer each other. And not everybody's like that, and not every experience is like that. But maybe thinking about that and not saying, "Well, I know what you are going through because of this thing that is not exactly like that," right? So,
100%.
Well, I'm really looking forward to sharing part 2 next week. Anything else before we call it quits for the evening?
No, just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
All right. Farewell, listeners. Thanks for joining us on this special and maybe slightly different edition of the Nerd Journey podcast. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @VJourneyman for Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.